Welcome to another episode of the Executive Exclusive. I'm your County Executive, Julie Giordano, and with me, I know I promised Brad Hoffman, but it is not happening, and we'll explain that a little bit later on. But with me always is Bunky Leffman, our Director of Administration. So Bunky, you're just as good as Brad, so we're happy that you're here.
Well, the great news is I have better hair than Brad, so I'm a great guest.
You are a great guest. That's why I bring you on the show all the time, is because of your great hair. So we have a couple of things that we are going to cover. And again, we apologize for not being here when we say we're going to be here. It's really difficult sometimes to get over to the studio, but we're so grateful for our friends at PAC 14 who are so accommodating to our schedules. And it's still been a little busy, even though we got the budget turned in. So the first thing I was going to talk about was the state of the county and the recap. So do you want to talk a little bit about our approach on the state of the county and why we did it the way that we did it, which is kind of unconventional?
Yeah, so last year, doing your first State of the County, you had this idea of having department heads give sort of their view, their update of what's happened in the past year. So we continued that model this year, and it went over really well last year, and I think people really appreciate it because a lot of times in these states of the county, if you go around counties, either in a commission form, the commission president or the executive will give it, and they'll give a 20-minute speech. But then they obviously, the executive or commission form of government, have a lot of people on payroll that help make those things happen. So this is a time period where our department heads rightfully get to say what their department did and what they sort of helmed for the year. So it's good for them, it's good for the department, and the department heads are the subject matter experts and everything. So it's great to have them out front in public and talking about their work.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want everybody to know, too, this is not something that we mandated them to do. So we sent it out to all the department heads, sheriff's office, sent it over to state's attorney, anybody who wanted to participate that felt that they had something to share. We welcomed it. And so that was the group, that had came forward and said that we wanted, to be a part of it. So I was really grateful for everyone, who participated in the state of the county. And just a couple of highlights from that. We did a SWOT analysis with each of our departments that I say answer to, but they're part of the executive office, part of the executive branch. And they came to us and they told us their strengths, their weaknesses, their opportunities, and their threats. And from that, we were able to formulate the 6 pillars of success. And so that's kind of what drove our budget. And so that's going to kind of move us on to the council meeting. So this council meeting was super important. Not a lot of county work. There was a lot of proclamations. They talked about the teacher of the year and the rising star of the year. So we were able to recognize all of those people. But we submitted the budget. And so can you sort of walk, I guess, our viewers kind of through what that process is of the submission of the budget and how important that is?
So in our county, the executive has to submit a budget by the third Tuesday in April. So we did that. And then the budget should be passed by January 15th. So between now June 15th. So between now and June 15th, what's going to happen is there will be several budget sessions with the council and department heads, the council in our office, and there's sort of a negotiation that takes place. For instance, last year there was $1.3 million more for education. The council cut it to $800,000, and then that money, if I remember right, was put back into employee raises. So there'll be sort of that back and forth that's going to happen over the next couple months.
Yeah, definitely some horse trading, going on with that. And when we met with all of our department heads, which we sort of talked about the budget process when Pam was on here, but we met with all the department heads, what would you say was their biggest ask, like the biggest thing that they were worried about?
Well, recruitment and retainment is particularly important. And it's not just our area. Every area in Maryland, and I hear it from my fellow county administrators, has a version of this where it happens a lot with EMS, police, paid fire for the areas that have paid fire, engineers. I mean, these really sort of specialty jobs where you need unique training, that kind of thing. Counties and municipalities tend to take those from each other. And so it's incredibly important when you bring someone on, you give training, which costs a lot of money often to get them the license, to get them whatever it is in that field. So usually, sometimes thousands of dollars the county invest in people. And what you don't want to do is that person's here for a year or two. They get to that. Now they're fully licensed and they have everything in it. We've taken them through all the training, and you don't want them to now go to a municipality or a surrounding county for, an extra $1,000 or even $5,000 a year, because you've now lost all the investment. Your investment now, basically travels with them to the different entity. And look, this happens to us where we have fellow counties that offer our people more money. We've also done it to other counties. There's sort of this thing, and the only way really to guard against it is to make sure you have a great package when it comes to benefits and also pay. And particularly, there are a lot of people who put a premium on pay, which makes sense, So we really have tried to address that, and that's retainment and a little and recruitment, because the more that we're better known as being employee friendly and sort of paying our people an appropriate wage with the benefits package we have, the better off we're going to be with both.
Yeah. So I would say definitely that the biggest thing was, we have to take care of our people, and we need to figure out a way to get more people in the door. And so one of the examples, I was telling people is public safety, for example, is a big chunk of our budget. It's the second highest entity, and that encompasses a lot of things. But public safety is hurting across our county, across the state, across the country. And we met with all of those entities, and they all needed a lot of things, and we weren't able to give them every single thing they wanted, but we were able to, give them something. Like, when we talk about our sheriff's office, we knew the sheriff's office collective bargaining agreement was coming up. And so we knew we were going to be, kind of doing some horse trading with that as well. We were making sure to give our command staff, their 5% raise. We gave our dispatchers there an 8% raise. Emergency services comes in, same thing with their dispatchers. If we could just get the 8% raise, we did that. For our corrections, we did a new scale for corrections. Was it everything they wanted? No. When we look at our volunteer firemen, we last year upped theirs $1 million. This year we set aside $750,000 for their tax credit, and we're looking at a couple of other things for them. And then for the city of Salisbury, we were looking to kind of bring them up to the same level as our volunteer departments. Was that everything that everybody wanted? No, but we were trying really hard to give everybody something. And it was like that, I feel like, across the board, where people had, we want, A, B, C, and D, but we'll settle for A and B, or A, B, and C. So we really, I think, tried to do that. And I felt like, people have no idea what it's like to sit in this seat, just like not everybody knows what it's like to sit in your seat. There have only been 3 other executives besides me, so I'm the 4th one. So it's very difficult for people to empathize, for what that we have to deal with on a daily basis. And I mean, you can probably attest to this. It's so hard to have to make that phone call to a department head and say, hey, look, we can do this, but we can't do this. Yeah. I mean, do you agree?
Absolutely, because I wish we could accommodate all the requests. The requests are valid. There are things that we definitely need to do. When I was with the state, one of the big issues we had at the Department of Natural Resources that we inherited, and when I say we, I mean my time under Secretary Hadaway Riccio, was a lot of deferred maintenance, $50–60 million worth of deferred maintenance in state parks. And it really, we were trying to correct it, and the legislature actually passed a bill to give the parks the money to get at that backlog. And so that's another thing, is a really important part of the budget is the maintenance of things. And it is really, I don't want to say easy, but it is an area where governments tend to cut, but then you pay for it long term. Mm-hmm. I mean, if you don't fix the leak in your roof, then potentially you're going to have mold issues. So it is really important in the budget process that we maintain our assets. So that's sort of a hidden thing in the budget, and that's something we also tend to address. But there are other governments, like I said, what the state would do is sometimes they would sort of cut that funding and free it up for this project over here. And you just really have to have the discipline to say, look, I know that you need this X new thing, you need this new thing in your department. I think we can wait a year because you have a leaky roof, or whatever the comparable would be. So we're going to do your maintenance to make sure that in the long term we don't take a $100,000 problem and turn it into a $5 million problem, or whatever it would be.
Yeah, exactly. And so having to be so strategic about things, and we tried a lot of different things with this budget. We were working so hard week after week. And I do feel like, and everybody's a critic, and I understand that. The budget came out, there were a lot of questions, but we look forward to the work sessions. And this sort of leads into the county council press release that came out. And, I have a hard time, swallowing that because again, we worked so hard on that budget. And when we turn in a budget that's at 198 million, which is literally 2.5% higher, meaning that we are below the inflation rate, and really strategically worked where if there were things that we could purchase now because of leftover salary savings, we did that. One thing that I brought up to the news as well, was at our corrections facility, they wanted an x-ray machine. And then that way when inmates or whoever, came in, they were, scanned, and then it was checking for drugs or weapons or whatever, keeping the rest of the population safe. And that was, 163,000. Well, she had some salary savings. So rather than buying it in 25, we said, buy it now. Buy it now. We have the money now. And by doing those little decisions, we were able to get our department heads the things that they needed, but we were also able to bring our capital costs down. And I think when we went over some numbers with Pam, she said that our capital costs were down. Our raises, our operation was up a little bit, about 5 or 6%, which I was, happy with, because again, it's that recruitment and retaining and wanting to keep people. So it really is like a fine dance, like kind of going back and forth as to how you can, strategically put it into place. But jumping back to this council press release, I felt that it was really harsh to say that it looks like that we just didn't even think anything through, because we really tried as strategic as possible to do the best decision making for Wacomico County. And I know I talked to a councilman yesterday, and we, of course, Fruitland primary, the hot topic has been brought up. Can you do me a favor though, because I don't know if all of our viewers really know what's going on with Fruitland primary. I will say, originally, we were not planning on funding Fruitland in this point. We were going to fund it, but not until 2027, because we didn't have a lot of debt service falling off. As things kind of rolled out, it looked as if we were going to fund Fruitland, and there were two options. So can you talk a little bit about what the council wanted, and then kind of what we had decided to do and why?
Well, the main point I think that gets missed in Fruitland primary is it is not a one-time payment of $20.5 million. That would be this year. Then there's another 26.5 million that would have to be paid next year. So it's a two fiscal year budget thing. So it's about $47 million. So if we go out to bond for this, for the 20 million, I believe we're doing PAYGO for 500,000, and we go out to bond for 20 million. That allows us to put the 20 million sort of in the bank. We'll get interest on it, that kind of thing, while they start the process. And how we do it is we disperse. The Board of Ed says, hey, this was $1 million. We cut them a check for $1 million. So that's sort of how it goes.
Right, they pull draws on it, basically. Yeah.
Yeah. So that makes a lot more sense than over the 2-year cycle taking $47 million out of our reserves or our unassigned fund balance, which is $84 million. So it makes a lot more sense than literally cutting that in half, our reserve on one project. And so we thought it's the fiscally responsible and fiscally conservative thing to do the bond. And look, we can't guarantee what the bond will yield as far as an interest rate. However, what we can say is that we will have money in the bank making interest, which will offset at least a portion of that cost. Also, typically the things you bond are things that last 20 or more years. Well, a school is right in that zone. That's the stuff you want to bond. You don't want to bond, $1 million piece of equipment
or like a parking lot that's not going to last.
Or a parking
years,
lot.
Yeah.
So this is specifically something that schools have been bonded before in the county. It's not a big deal. The council would rather us pay it out of the reserves, and I do understand the argument, because then you don't have to pay interest. The problem is, at some point, we need a reserve for a reason. So do you want to pay the $47 million more than half of our reserves on one project. We just don't think that that's the fiscally conservative or fiscally responsible thing to do.
Yeah, and I think that, well, and I don't even know if we have gotten an actual answer as to what they wanted us to do for next year. Yeah. Is that being pulled out? Do they want that bonded? And so the thing I'm frustrated about this press release that went out was we had not even had a work session on it. And I think it's imperative that before you send out a press release, that you actually hear the reasoning why. We literally submitted the budget. There were a couple of questions about it, and that was it. Yeah. And I remember Councilman Baker saying, we need a work session on this sooner than later, and I totally agreed. And we are ready for that work session. We're going to take them through exactly why we did what we did and the reasonings why we did what we did. But again, those are those questions. What was next year's plan? Is next year's plan to take it out of PAYGO, or are we bonding that? So there's just a lot of questions that I think should have been discussed prior to putting out a press release, especially when you have a press release, to me, that I would define as misinformation, misleading, that has people, they're calling for this mass of people to come in and talk about, oh, how irresponsible this was. And I tried to explain this to a couple of people along with the council member that when we took that idea back, we weren't necessarily opposed to the $20 million out of PAYGO, but when we took it back to our financial advisors, our finance team, they said it was financially reckless. Those were the words, reckless. And I tried to explain this, that it is my job as an executive. I entrust these individuals. So I am going to trust the finance advisors and our finance team to give me the finance advice. And when they're saying this is the best way to do it, I feel like I at least owe it to them to listen. That's why we put them on staff, And so I was just a little frustrated by those actions, but we have our next council meeting is May 7th, and I actually plan to make a public comment. There is a public hearing on the budget, and I do plan to make a comment. And so we'll see how that goes, and I think they'll be kind of shocked actually in the way that my approach is going to be with this budget, because at the end of the day, this budget is submitted, but it is not in stone. And so there's still some moving pieces that can happen. And I'm hoping that we will be able to set those personalities aside and go into these work sessions with an open mind and good questions, and not gotcha questions, and not turn it into like a Jerry Springer episode. We don't need that. Nobody in the county needs that. We don't need it. They don't need it. The citizens don't need it. But we need to work together, and put forward the best budget that we can for the citizens of the county. So, and just real quick, so everybody understands. So the executive submits the budget, and can you just explain what council's role is at this point in time with the budget?
So the council is allowed to cut the budget, and then they cannot on their own add to the budget. However, if they cut $1 million for one thing, they can say, we would like this to go into the budget for whatever thing they want. And then you can say yes or no. And if you say no, they can either come up with another idea. And if they don't, then that goes to what's called contingency, which sort of is set off to the side. And then throughout that fiscal year, you can say, hey, this come up. We can do a budget amendment that goes to council and say, hey, we would like to come out of the contingency fund to fund this. And we can do that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think also, and this is the last thing I'm going to talk about Fruitland, is there's a little bit of a discrepancy about the council basically adding. So I think they thought they were adding to the budget, saying that we're going to add Fruitland and we're going to do it this way. But they weren't really adding it to the budget because the budget hadn't even been presented yet. They added it to the CIP. And I tried to explain this to a lot of people. So our CIP, and we've talked about the CIP on here, the Capital Improvement Plan, it's almost like a Christmas wish list. Our departments come in and say, I want this, 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 and this for my department. And then we use that Christmas wish list to make the budget. And so what council ended up doing was adding it to the CIP, which we don't really think they have the ability to do.
It's a violation of the charter.
It is a violation of the charter. You said it.
Yeah.
So they really weren't capable of doing it. But we very much could have said, tough, we're not adding it, but we didn't. We knew that that's what they wanted. And knowing that the majority of them wanted to move forward with the Fruitland project, we went back and brainstormed and figured out the best, most cost-effective, fiscally conservative, and not reckless way of making sure that we were able to build Fruitland Primary.
Well, and what the council, and this is where the confusion comes in, the CIP is a planning document. It is not the budget. the annual budget we submitted on the third Tuesday of April. So before the third Tuesday of April is when that happened. And they are allowed by state law, if there's something the Board of Education puts in their budget that the executive doesn't fund, they can add to the budget. That's the only time they can add to the budget to fund those things. So they sort of signaled to us, hey, if you don't do Fruitland Primary in your budget, then we're going to add it to the budget. So we got that signal loud and clear. So we're doing Fruitland Primary.
Yeah. I mean, and that's the biggest thing to remember is, we're getting Fruitland Primary, and I think that's the most important thing. Yep. And then the last hot topic, which hopefully this will be the last executive exclusive where we talk about the safari at the quarry. I say this all the time. Had I had known, you try very hard to come up with really cool and fun events here in Wacomico County, and you want to bring people to the county and you want them to enjoy what we have here. And this was basically an attempt, to do that, to utilize a space that is, only being utilized for one purpose at this point in time, but there's 200 and some acres on it, and we're going to bring this event in. So I know most of you know what the Safari at the Quarry is. It is a Jeep-only event that is taking place on May 4th and 5th at our Conley Mill location. The latest right now on that is that there is the city had some questions about the zoning situation. We feel we're exempt. Their attorney sent over something where our attorneys kind of answered. And it's really actually frustrating to me at this point in time that literally attorneys are involved in this. Like, it's absolutely ridiculous. And, but at the end of the day, we kept Brad off of here just because of the litigation factor. Not that there is litigation, but we just wanted to keep him separate off here. He did do an interview with WBOC, and I just want to say, from the standpoint of the executive, I am sorry to all business owners out there, because this is not how I want to show that we do business. There are going to be businesses that come here at some point in time that not everybody agrees with, and that's okay. My thought on that is if there's a business that comes to Wacomico County, I don't care where it is, and you don't agree with that business, or you don't like that business, or whatever the case may be, just don't go. Don't be a patron to that event, or don't be a patron to that specific place, and that's what I find just so unbelievable right now. And I'm not going to make you go into it, but do you have any last thoughts on this? Because hopefully this event is, it'll happen in 2 weeks, and we'll just hopefully move on with our lives.
Well, I live in Delmar, so I really like, and actually the house that I first lived in when I was an infant was on Conley Mill Road, so I know the area, and my uncle Jim Cleverwide owned a big farm on the corner of Fosky and Conley Mill. So I really know the area really well, growing up there and riding bikes there and what have you. And I think that, and this isn't everyone but what I've heard a couple people say is essentially you're not hearing us, the people that are concerned with the event. And I would say, no, we did. And we amended, we literally got the business owner to amend the contract to reflect some of their concerns. We also met with the HOA president early on, months and months ago. Brad talked to the incoming HOA president, had a good conversation. So we actually, and before any of that, we did our due diligence. We had talked to legal, we had talked to planning and zoning, we had talked to our park and rec, who of course do a lot of events. So we had talked to a lot. We do our homework on these things. And so this event, I get that the neighbors, don't want her to go forward, but the county has a valid contract that was drawn up by the Department of Law, the county's Department of Law. So the vendor has this valid contract. We, as a county, cannot be in the business of breaking a contract with a company at the last minute, which would imperil us legally, what have you. And honestly, I think this is going to be a great event, a great family-friendly event. Kylan Barn is going to have, I think, a majority of the traffic, a majority of the folks are going to go there. They're going to allow, I think it's 25 Jeeps at a time to go from there to the Conley Mill property, drive, 3 or 5 or 7 miles an hour around it, and then go right back to Kylan Barn. So it's not like you're going to have I think at one point someone said 5,000 people. Now, having grown up in Delmar, I know that Delmar, Maryland, Delaware together equal 4,600 people. So there is literally not going to be a town the size of Delmar on the Conley Mill Park.
Right, right.
There's going to be 25 Jeeps at one time that do that. They go back to Kyle and Barn, then the next 25 will go. And I expect, 100, 150 Jeeps. So there will be several of those, but they'll be intermittent. So it won't be a constant source of traffic or anything like that. The sheriff's office obviously had said that he'll be out there, which we knew, and we gave him the safety plan a few months ago, or the traffic plan. So I think it'll be a very good, controlled, family-friendly event that people will walk away from, having enjoyed it. And they'll have visited Wycomico County. They'll have spent money in Delmar, but also probably North Salisbury and hotels, restaurants, those sorts of things, which is what you want. We want some tourism to happen here. So I think at the end of the day, I think a couple weeks from now, when this is all said and done, we'll have had a great event, and we'll sit down, we'll look at it, we'll look at things that went right, things that could have been better. We'll look at an economic impact study. We'll do an economic impact study on it, and we'll go from there.
Yeah, absolutely. And talking to a lot of the different entities, I know that there are a lot of people that have said, oh, well, there's a petition going on out there. And if you look at the petition, it basically says, well, we want it to be a public park. And I have told people numerous times, I think they think that I took this public park away, and this was done way before my administration. And we had talked about moving, or they, not even me, had talked about moving that allocation of program open space to that facility. It didn't go forward. It didn't go forward. The council had decided that they didn't want that, and so it ended up, the program open space allocation sort of went back to West Metro Core, and that was it, in 2021. So it's really a shame, because if there were so many people that were so adamant about it being a park, that in 2021 would have been a perfect opportunity to come to the council meeting and say, don't get rid of this. We want this as a park, and unfortunately I feel like that boat has just left. I mean, it's not saying that it couldn't come back, but right now, I mean, it's just off the table right now, for that. Well, and we're pulling dirt from it still. We need that dirt for the landfill.
Well, yeah, and putting my public works hat on, long term, maybe it becomes a park. Maybe that's the highest and best use. But right now, we need to continue to dig dirt there unless and until the county's able to acquire something else, because it would cost the taxpayers a lot of money if we had to buy dirt.
Yeah.
A lot, millions of dollars. So right now we mine it for dirt that is needed at the landfill. So we can't. I don't know how those two things would coexist, where we would have a county park where we also mined it. I don't know. Maybe there's a way to make that happen, but we cannot stop mining dirt there, regardless of what happens, until we've exhausted the resource.
Right, exactly. And then just the last thing I wanted to talk about is, just speaking of Delmar, we have a really cool event coming up. So we have He Cook Fest on Friday. So Keith He Cook, I'm sure most of you know, was an officer who lost his life in 2021. Devastating to the community, devastating to Wycomico County, to Delmar. And so honoring him and, doing a remembrance event. And I really have to give the town of Delmar, Kylan Barn, Doug Marshall, all of these people just coming together and never letting the community forget, Keith He Cook. And the one thing that I have to say about that situation was, man, we come together. We really do. I mean, we are such a back the blue community, and I would really hope, and I've said this before, that every police officer felt that love, around it. And it is such a tragic event that happened, but just to know that the community is behind, the majority, 90% and 99% of our community is behind our law enforcement. And so we look forward to He Cook Fest. Are you coming on Friday to He Cook Fest?
Absolutely. And, I was on the town council in Delmar and was deputy mayor, so I met Mr. He Cook several times, and, just a great guy. And I still, it's sort of a sore point, because I still really feel so much empathy toward, his family.
Oh, yeah.
Just, that as a town, and I grew up in Delmar. As a town, it certainly hurt us, but nothing in the magnitude toward, his family. And I really am empathetic for that whole situation. But I am glad that we absolutely celebrate his legacy and his community work.
Yeah, absolutely. So so we look forward to that event. If you don't have anything to do Friday night, come out to Kylan Barn. It's free. It's a free event. They're collecting donations for the Tangier Classic, which is another entity that is raising money for another organization. So we will be out there on Friday. And I think that is all the time that we have for the day. I'm just going to end with our quote of the day. But Bunk, thank you so much for being here with me. And that quote is, "Leadership requires standing firm for what we know is right and not wavering." Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.